for today, Ruth Adams, and I'm here with Manuela Carmona from Community Legal Aid. Hi, how are you today?
I'm good, how are you?
Let's first start off with an overview of your role at Community Legal Aid.
So I am a staff attorney in the Fair Housing Unit at Community Legal Aid here in the Worcester office.
Can you talk about your background and what got you into this?
Sure. So both of my parents are immigrants and I'm an immigrant myself. I was a first-generation college graduate. I actually went to Holy Cross here in Worcester. And I was also a first-generation law school graduate. So it was really important for me to serve a community that I had been in my past and help those that would not be able to afford an attorney for various serious legal matters. Just because I would want to have someone, I would have wanted to have someone help my parents in that way if they were dealing with something like this when they first came to this country.
And can you give us a brief explanation of Community Legal Aid and legal services in general?
Sure. So Community Legal Aid is a civil legal aid organization. We help residents of Central and Western Massachusetts that are low income and elderly. And these residents, a lot of them fall below the 125th percentile of the federal poverty level. So a lot of these clients would not be able to afford civil legal representation otherwise in cases that are very serious and can be detrimental to their livelihoods. And what our organization does is that we provide pro bono services to them.
That's great. Why do you think it's important that people know about Community Legal Aid?
So I think it's important because a lot of tenants or just people in general would not be given access to an attorney if they were battling against a civil case. Unlike in criminal court where you're given access to an attorney if you can't afford one, a lot of these clients are going in front of a judge pro se and they don't really know the way that the court system works. They don't really have a lot of insight in how to defend themselves in these cases. So having an attorney that is free because they can't afford an attorney otherwise is really beneficial to these serious legal matters that they're facing.
What areas of law does Community Legal Aid focus on?
So we have several different units. Some of them are our housing unit, employment law unit, access to benefits, and we also have a family law unit.
Could you go more into detail on each unit?
Sure. So our housing unit provides representation in eviction matters. We also help tenants that are living in unfair or unsafe conditions in their homes. Our access to benefits unit will help elderly tenants or clients, in order to obtain access to things like Medicare or Medicaid if they're having issues with those. Our family law unit helps survivors of domestic violence by helping them obtain abuse prevention orders against their abusers. And our employment law unit will do things like advocate for people in the workforce that are not being paid overtime wages or are being treated unfairly or in a discriminatory way in their workplace.
What is fair housing?
So fair housing is the right to live in safe and fair conditions. There is a Fair Housing Act that is part of the Civil Rights Act, and this Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination if you are in a protected class. Some of these protected classes are race or national origin. Massachusetts also has state laws that are much broader and encompass a lot of other classes that are not in the Federal Fair Housing Act. So we're able to use both the Fair Housing Act and Massachusetts fair housing laws to advocate for tenants in Central and Western Massachusetts.
What do you do specifically as a fair housing attorney?
So as a fair housing attorney, we represent tenants that are facing evictions. We also represent people in administrative cases against housing authorities, for example. We file affirmative cases in housing court, and we also do a lot of community outreach and education.
And what types of cases or themes are you seeing in the Worcester County?
So the themes we're seeing in Worcester County are a lot of disability discrimination. We see a lot of voucher holder status discrimination, and we are seeing a lot of discrimination in domestic violence survivors. So that's mostly the trends we're seeing now.
Could you go more into detail on those?
Sure. So I can discuss some of the cases I'm working on because they are exactly tied to these themes that we're seeing. So most of the cases I have are disability discrimination based. So it's a lot of landlords that are discriminating against tenants that can't comply with their leases because of their disabilities. So in order to help these tenants, we file something called a reasonable accommodation request. Reasonable accommodation request asks for landlords to create exceptions to their lease regulations so that a tenant can comply with them. A lot of times we file these reasonable accommodation requests as defenses to evictions, but we will also file these reasonable accommodation requests proactively so that a tenant doesn't have an eviction filed in court. But what we're seeing a lot of is that landlords are ignoring the reasonable accommodation requests that we file. So they go ahead and file an eviction, and we kind of just have to go to housing court and deal with it there, as opposed to being able to deal with it outside of court. Another case that I just worked on with the MCAD, which is the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, was a case in which a tenant of ours had a housing voucher. Housing vouchers allow tenants to find a rental in the private market as opposed to living in subsidized housing. This tenant had a voucher, and she was told that she did not meet the income requirements in order to qualify for the unit, even though the voucher that she had would have covered the entirety of the rent. So what we did is we filed a case at the MCAD, and we essentially came to an agreement with that property that they had to view vouchers as a source of income, because essentially that was the tenant's income, and she should have qualified for the unit because she had sufficient money in order to pay for her rent. And finally, I am also currently working on an affirmative case in housing court, in which the tenant was a survivor of domestic violence. Her landlords essentially pushed her out of her unit because there was damage to the unit caused due to the altercations with her abuser. In Massachusetts, there are laws saying that landlords have to provide exceptions when something like this happens because the person is dealing with domestic violence, but these landlords did exactly the opposite. So we filed an affirmative case in court, and we're currently in the process of litigating that.
Yeah. Are there any other cases that have stood out to you?
Mostly just the discrimination against disabilities that we're seeing, just because disabilities can be visible to the eye, but there's also a lot of mental disabilities that are not visible, and when people can't comply to their lease because of their disabilities, they should be given leeway, and they should be able to live in housing that's fair to them, and they can't because of their disabilities. So.
How can you apply for services?
So you can apply online at communitylegal.org, or you can call our intake line, which is 855-252-5243.
Great, thank you for coming in today.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
That was The Beat. See you next time.